Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to Theology at the Threshold. My name is Cole Burks, and this is my contextual project for my master's degree. I am going to be taking topics that I am studying in school and putting them into podcast form so that we can learn together. I want to make these things really accessible for you and for those who are interested in knowing what it's like to kind of be in seminary school. And so thank you so much for jumping on and listening today. I hope this encourages you. I hope you find this helpful. And most of all, I hope this deepens your walk with God. Welcome to Season 1. Well, hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Pastor Cole Burks, and I am the lead pastor of Resting Place Church. But this is not an official church podcast. This is for my master's project. But one of the things that I wanted to do with this project was make it accessible to everyone in our church. And because of that, over the course of the seasons of this podcast, I'm going to have different people from our church on the podcast. But for this one specifically, season number 1, we're going to be talking about spiritual formation. I have the one and only Brandon McAlpine.
Well, howdy.
On the show.
Howdy.
On the show. Yeah. Oh, I just kicked the mic. That's okay. But I did want to just say, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, of course.
This is my master's project.
It's going to be a grand old time.
Yeah. I'm rewarding them with good food.
I'm a simple person.
Yeah.
Doesn't take much.
It's really great. So anyways, so this season number 1 is about spiritual formation.
Right.
And I think it's something that a lot of people, like when we say spiritual formation, is a perfect example. There was a guy that stopped by the church earlier. He literally said, "What are you recording a podcast about?" And I said, "Spiritual formation." He said, "What is that?"
Right.
And I think that's important.
Yeah.
So we're gonna talk about what spiritual formation is, what it isn't, clear up some things for some people, and I hope this helps you. Let's just jump right in, and I just want to talk for a second on if I could just give you the very basics of spiritual formation.
Yeah.
Let's
just start from square one and move from there.
So I always like to use this verse when talking about spiritual formation. And I have some notes here in front of me. So for my faculty mentors and my professional mentors and my personal mentors, this is not all off the dome, but this is all stuff that I wrote down. So,
listen, it was off the dome at some point.
That's right. Yeah. So, but I always use this verse. And this is really, I want to give this definition, and I got this definition from the library at my school. So this says this: Christian spiritual formation is the process of being formed and conformed into the image of Jesus for the glory and the sake of others. Let me read that again because I just screwed that up. Christian spiritual formation is the process of being conformed to the image of Jesus Christ for the glory of God and for the sake of others. 2 Corinthians 3:17 and 18 is the verse that people usually use when talking about this, and I think that's a good one. It says this: for the Lord is spirit, and wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Verse 18. So all of us who have had the veil removed can see and reflect the glory of the Lord. And the Lord, who is Spirit, makes us more and more like Him as we are changed into His glorious image. So the process of spiritual formation is being conformed into the image of Jesus for the glory of God. But we cannot be formed into the image of Jesus unless we know what Jesus looks like. And I think that's so important. Like in our formation in our walks with God, that we become so familiar with the person of Jesus.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, so when we're talking about like spiritual formation, if there's one thing that we have a lot of in Christianity, it's terminology.
Yep.
So when we're talking about like spiritual formation, what would you consider the differences to be between spiritual direction, pastoral counseling, spiritual formation, discipleship, like all those kind of different terms that we use to kind of talk about this topic?
Yep.
But kind of all have little different variances, I would imagine.
Yeah.
to them.
So spiritual direction specifically, this is kind of what I would like to define it as. Specifically, it focuses in on your relationship with God, a deepening of your relationship with God. And so I think that's so important just to get out of the gate. Spiritual formation is you being formed into the image of Jesus through the work of God in your life.
Right.
Okay. Spiritual direction is really something that I think that everyone should be involved in. I have a spiritual director. And I'll make the notes of the difference between that and pastoral counseling here in a second. But a spiritual director is someone who you just go and sit with. They become your friend, and they let you talk.
Right.
They pray with you, and you hear from God together. It's not, I'm going to give you advice. It is really this like person who is attentive to the voice of the Spirit and also teaches you how to do that.
Sure.
And so that's spiritual direction. Pastoral counseling is if you were to come to me with a problem and I were to say, go do this. This is what I think you should do.
Right.
That's pastoral counseling, and counseling just in general. And that's the majority of my work,
right.
Pastoral counseling. Like when people come to me and they're like, hey, I have a question about whatever. What do you think I should do? Well, I think you should lean into the voice of the Spirit. And that's where I get kind of, I'm not a spiritual director by any means, but I do think it's so important when people are asking, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
That they lean into the voice of the Spirit in that. And then discipleship is super contextual. So like in a lot of churches, they'll either have discipleship classes, they'll have next step classes, they'll have community groups, they'll have small groups, and they're really discipling you in the ways of Jesus in the best way that they know how to put language to them.
Right.
So for us, and you can't see all of this behind us, but really at this church, our dream is that your heart would find rest as we learn to practice the ways of Jesus faithfully. Okay. We also, you can't see it, it's on that wall over there.
Right.
We have ways of life. We believe that those ways of life are most faithful to the ways of Jesus. And they are, we gather on Sunday, we live in community, we prioritize family, we give generously, and we serve our neighbor.
Right.
So coming together for communal worship, getting together outside of church, going from house to house, breaking bread, prioritizing our families, making sure that they're raised in the things of God and that we are not absent from our families. We're present, and then giving, being generous, and then serving. And so I think discipleship is focusing on really the values and the things inside of a particular faith community more than anything. And so I think it's important, I think it's really important that you know that there is such thing as discipleship, there is such thing as spiritual direction, there is such thing as pastoral counseling, but spiritual formation is specifically God's work in you. And the beautiful thing is he uses all of those things to do that.
Right.
God is doing something specific in you, and it's deepening your relationship with him. And so I think that's really the best way I would define those things.
Right. So pastoral counseling, very practical. Mm-hmm. Discipleship, very contextual.
Yep.
Spiritual direction, very spiritual, obviously.
And then, personal.
And personal. And then spiritual formation is spiritual.
Yeah, it's very, spiritual direction is such a maybe I should have done a whole episode on spiritual direction.
Hey, maybe we will.
Maybe we will. But it's like, man, spiritual direction has absolutely changed my life because it has it's almost like spiritual formation is the fire within you that God puts.
Right.
There is a fire down in your bones for more of God. I want to know Jesus more, right? And then spiritual direction in this season of my life has just been gasoline on that fire.
Right.
And it has caused it to engulf. And man, it's just been such a beautiful thing.
All right. Now, the next question I think is, a big one for anybody listening to the podcast. Mm-hmm. Why is spiritual formation important? And why should people care about being intentional about spiritual formation?
Yeah. So I want to read this quote from Henry Newman. He wrote a book on spiritual formation. It's called Following the Movements of the Spirit. And it says this: spiritual formation prepares us for a life in which we move away from our fears, compulsions, resentments, sorrows, to serve with joy and courage in the world, even when this leads us to places we would rather not go. Spiritual formation helps us to see the face of God in the midst of a hardened world and in our hearts. This freedom helps us to use our skills and our very lives to make that face visible to all who live in bondage, and in the bondage of fear specifically. As Jesus told his disciples, if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed. We are being formed. Why should people care? This is I think this is so important. Why is it important? Why should people care? We are being formed into the image of Jesus, spiritual formation.
Right.
We are manifesting Jesus in the world wherever we go. One of the things that my bishop said at the convocation that we have every year for our diocese is he says this, that we are walking icons.
Yeah.
We are the face of Jesus. 2 Corinthians 5 says it like this. It says, we do not hold people in regard to their former lives, because
right.
The old things have passed away, the new things have come. Therefore now, you are an ambassador of Christ. God has reconciled you back to God in making you new, right? God is reconciling you, doing the work
right.
of reconciliation. And it says this, very interesting. He committed to us that same ministry of reconciliation, going out into the world and saying, give your life to Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it's so important that people note this. It says, you are an ambassador for Christ. You are the representative of Jesus in the earth. Spiritual formation is so deeply important that because of that reality, that there are people who need to see Jesus.
Right.
There are people in your world, if you're watching this, that today that you're going to pass that need to see Jesus. Us being formed into the image of God is not to give us a superiority complex. It's to give us really a service mentality.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to Jesus, I came not to be served, but not to be served, but to serve.
Yeah, and I think that's something that people should think about in their spiritual formation, that what God's doing in you doesn't stop with you.
Right.
And it's very, very, very important for people, I think, to understand that spiritual formation is what God's doing in you for the sake of others.
Yeah.
I think that's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to stay with you.
Right. Right. It starts with you, shouldn't stay there.
Yeah, it shouldn't stay there. Yep. And so is there any other questions or any other things that you think that maybe I should talk about more, go into deeper?
I think setting up for where we're going to be going with spiritual formation.
Yeah.
We kind of give a quick basis of what it is, in this, and like what the difference is between this and other, Christian terms that we've heard in regards to like growing in your faith. But like, what can the people expect to hear you talk about for the rest of this season?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So really what we're going to dive into, and this is a term that is pretty common
Sure.
when talking about spiritual formation, is that there's a such thing as active spirituality and passive spirituality. And I've been saying some of this on Sunday at our church, but the active side of spirituality is what you are doing. The passive side is what God's doing. And the rest of this season, the rest of this whole chat about formation and spiritual formation is really going to be making everyone really understand the difference between active and passive spirituality and what that looks like really on a regular basis in our lives. So, yep.
Yeah, so I know this is a bit of a shorter episode. Kind of be looking forward to longer ones as we kind of dive into things. This is a good
this is
setup.
This is the setup episode.
Yeah.
This is the ball on the tee. And so thank you so much for watching this first episode. This will be released in season format, so you can just go straight to the next episode.
Yep.
And we're going to be talking about some active and passive spirituality. So,
all right.